Hello everyone, and welcome to the Parry Guide. Parrying is a high-risk, high-reward technique that, when used properly, allows for a high-damage and triple S style punish. In order of increasing difficulty, the three methods of parrying are setup parrying, sight parrying, and prediction parrying. Setup parrying is generally set up by blocking a first swing and either reacting or predicting a follow-up attack. Take this example, where after goofing off for a bit, I block his first attack and react to a second swing for a setup parry. In Demon Souls, face tanking a first swing is also a viable option in the case you're dual wielding or you just fail to press L1. However, this is very inconsistent with many weapons because of ping fluctuations in the game. Sight parrying is whenever you see an attack being cast and time to parry accordingly. For prediction parrying, you want to look for patterns or bait your opponent into attacking. For this example, I notice my opponent spams R1 while they're staggered, so after landing an attack, I time a parry for their counter attack. First up, we have the dagger class that includes the dagger, parrying dagger, secret dagger, and baby's nail. For one-handed R1, parry as soon as you see their arm move. For one-handed R2, parry when you see their arm go forward. For setup parry, release L1 as you block, and press L2 a quarter second. For sprint attack, parry as soon as you see them move, or predict whenever they press L1. For two-handed R1, parry whenever you predict, they press R1. Two-handed R2, parry whenever the dagger reaches the highest point. For setup parry, release L1 as you block, and parry a quarter second later. For roll attacks, parry as both their feet hit the ground. For sprint attack, parry as soon as you see them move. Next up is the Stray Sword class weapons, which includes the Blue Blood Sword, Broadsword, Broken Sword, Longsword, Night Sword, Crisp Blade, Penetrating Sword, Rune Sword, and Short Sword. For the R1, parry a quarter second after they pull their hand up. For the R2, parry as you see their arm begin to move forward. For setup parry, release L1 as you block and parry a quarter second wait. For roll attack, parry as both their feet hit the ground. For sprint attack, parry as their sword is fully behind their back. For R1, parry when the sword reaches its highest point. For R2, parry half second after the animation starts. For setup parry, release L1 as you block the attack. Parry a quarter second late. For roll attack, parry as both their feet hit the ground. For sprint attack, parry just before their feet hit the ground. Next up we have the large swords, which includes the Bastard Sword, Claymore, Demon Brant, Flame Burge, Large Sword of Moonlight, Northern Regalia, Morion Blade, Soul Brant, and the Storm Ruler. For R1, parry as the sword begins to swing towards you. For R2, parry as the sword points vertically. For the setup parry, whenever you see the sword change direction. For roll attack, parry when the blade is pointed backwards. For sprint attack, parry when the sword is pointing vertically. For R1, parry a quarter second after the animation starts. For R2, parry when the sword is about to point vertically. For setup parry, parry whenever you see the blade change direction. For roll attack, parry whenever you see the sword begin to come towards you. For sprint attack, parry when the blade is completely behind their back. Next up are the very large swords, which includes the Dragon Bone Smasher and the Great Sword. For R1, parry when their foot steps forward. For R2, parry when their foot steps forward. The roll attack seemed bugged during our recording. It seemed to phase through me, as you can see. It wasn't a partial because I didn't take chip damage on my HP or stamina, and there's a timestamp for the same animation in class. For sprint attack, parry a quarter second after the animation starts. For R1, parry when their hands are next to the face. For R2, parry when their hands are directly above their head. The rolling and sprinting attacks were found to be unparryable in my testing. Next up is the curved swords, which includes the blind, the falchion, the large sword of searching, the scimitar, the shotel, and the, oh lord, Kalige. For the R1, parry as soon as you see their hand move. For R2, parry when you see the sword is directly above their head. For setup parry, release L1 if you get hit, and parry immediately. For roll attack, parry when you see the sword is above their head. For sprint attack, parry when the sword is above their head. For R1, predict and press parry when they press R1. For R2, parry as the sword crosses their face. For setup parry, release L1 as you block, and parry immediately. For roll attack, parry as their feet touch the ground. For sprint attack, parry as soon as you see their hands move. Next up we have the katanas, which includes the hiltless, magic sword Makoto, and Uchi katana. For R1, predict and parry as they press R1. For R2, parry when you see them begin to move forward. For setup, parry immediately after your block or stagger. For roll attack, parry as their feet touch the ground. For sprint attack, parry as soon as you see their hand move. For R1, parry when the sword is fully raised. For R2, parry when they begin to move forward. For setup parry, parry immediately after your stagger or block. For roll attack, parry as their feet touch the ground. For sprint attack, predict and parry as they press R1. Next is thrusting swords, which includes Epei's rapier, estoc, Jerry's stiletto, needle of eternal agony, mailbreaker, rapier, and spiral rapier. For R1, parry as soon as you see their hands move. For R2, parry as they begin to swing forward. For setup, parry a half second after your block. For roll attack, parry just before their feet touch the ground. For sprint attack, parry as their arms begin to move forward. For R1, predict and parry as they press R1. For R2, parry as the weapon is fully pulled back. For setup, parry a quarter second after you block. For roll attack, parry as their feet touch the ground. For sprint attack, parry when their front foot touches the ground. Next up is axes, including the battle axe and the guillotine axe. For R1, parry as their weapon is fully raised. For R2, parry when the weapon is beginning to swing forward. For setup, parry a quarter second after your block. For roll attack, parry as their feet touch the ground. For sprint attack, parry when the axe is above their head. For R1, parry as their weapon is fully raised. For R2, parry when the weapon is beginning to swing forward. For setup, parry a quarter second after your block. For roll attack, parry as their feet touch the ground. For sprint attack, parry when their feet are about to land. Next up is the large axes, which includes the crescent axe, dozer axe, great axe, and ritual blade. For R1, parry as the weapon passes their head. For R2, parry whenever the weapon is completely behind their back. For the roll attack, parry when the weapon is pointing backwards. For the sprint attack, parry when they begin to extend their arm. The R1, R2, and rolling two-handed attack was found to be unparryable in our testing. For the sprint attack, walk into the player and parry a half second after the weapon is fully raised. Next up we have hammers, which includes club, mace, morning star, pickaxe, and war pick. For the R1, you need to parry as soon as you see their arm move. For R2, parry when the weapon is over their head. For setup, parry immediately after your block. For roll attack, parry as their feet touch the ground. For sprint attack, parry as the weapon is pointing backwards. For R1, parry when the weapon is fully above their head. For R2, parry a half second after the weapon is pulled back. For setup, parry a quarter second after your block. For roll attack, parry as soon as their feet touch the ground. For sprint attack, parry as soon as their feet land. Next up is the large hammers, which includes the brand, great club, and meat cleaver. For R1, parry as the weapon passes their head. For R2, parry whenever the weapon is completely behind their back. For the roll attack, parry when the weapon is pointing backwards. For the sprint attack, parry when they begin to extend their arm. The R1, R2, and rolling two-handed attacks was found to be unparryable in our testing. For the sprint attack, parry a half second after the weapon is full raised. Next up is fist weapons, which includes claws, hands of God, iron knuckles, and I guess bare hands if you're facing somebody that's crazy. For R1, predict and parry as they press R1. For R2, parry as soon as you see them start to move forward. For setup parry, parry a quarter second after your block. For roll attack, parry just before their feet touch the ground. For sprint attack, parry when their back foot lands. Next up is spears, which includes the Istarel, scraping spear, short spear, and wing spear. For R1, parry when the weapon is fully pulled back. For R2, parry just before their momentum shifts forward. For setup parry, half a second after the block. For the block attack, walk into the player and parry as they press R1. For roll attack, parry when you see the weapon move. For sprint attack, parry when you see the weapon raised. For R1, walk into the player and parry a quarter second after they press R1. For R2, walk into the player and parry as they land on the ground. For setup, parry a quarter second after the block. For roll attack, parry as soon as you see the weapon move. For sprint attack, parry as soon as you see the weapon move. And finally, polearms, which includes the halberd, meridian hammer, phosphorescent pole, war scythe, and reaper scythe. For the R1, parry after the polearm passes their body. For R2, parry a half second after the polearm passes above their head. For setup, parry a half second after the block. For roll attack, parry whenever you see the weapon move. For sprint attack, parry whenever you see the weapon move. For R1, walk into the player and parry as they press R1. The R2 was found to be unparryable in our testing. For setup, parry whenever you see the player's shoulder move. For roll attack, move into the player and parry as their weapon begins to move. For sprint attack, move into the player and parry as soon as their weapon moves. And my final word here, I just want to tell you guys that the number one thing to parrying in this game is adapting to the ping. feel like almost every single match has a different level of ping, and this changes the parry timings and methods specifically pretty significantly. And if you can adapt to each game and figure out what the ping is just from feel, that'll help you out a lot. And other than that, that's all you really need to know in order to be on your way to become a true parry king. And now I'm just going to beg you to like and especially comment on this video, because I've honestly put way too much time into this video. And I hope that shows in its quality. And I just want you to know that for a small channel like mine, just one person liking and commenting really goes a long way in helping the video. But that's enough of my pleading. Thank you so much for watching to the end. I hope this has helped you out, and I hope I will be seeing you, if not back on this channel, in Boletaria.